Okay, so now we turn to our adventures in part 4, rights and the basis of liberté. Now, the issue, the subject, the topic of rights is pretty much always been relevant, since people started talking about them. And of course, even today, the issue is still quite relevant, because we have concerns about various rights. Now, we often cast them in the context of, politics, because our debates about these are usually in that arena. We talk about, for example, the right to marriage. And along with that, we also talk about the right that people say do not recognize certain marriages. And same-sex marriage provides, both a legal sort of issue, battle, and also a moral one. So there's the question of, legally, should people who disapprove of same-sex marriage, do they have the right not to serve customers? So if someone comes into a bakery and says, I'd like you to bake a wedding cake, and they're getting married to someone of the same sex, can the baker make a moral argument that they have a right not to engage in creating a cake for a marriage they disagree with? And there's the legal issue, is that law? But there's also the moral issue, is that morally okay? Other rights, of course, we consider today would be, Second Amendment is every time there's a mass shooting, people start debating about gun control, and the legal right of the Second Amendment comes up. But there's also the moral question. Do people have a moral right to be armed? Which is, connected to but distinct from the legal issue. So Second Amendment rights, both legal and moral, come into play. A very big one, of course, these days is, to give an example of a right, is the right to privacy. We have, the government, the NSA, getting into our business. Our employers, want to get into our business as well. And so there are questions about not only the legality, legally what should the NSA be doing, or legally what does your employer have access to, but there's also the moral questions. Morally, what should, the government be getting into in regards to our business? Or morally, what should employers be allowed to get into to know about you? And so rights are always a point of concern. Now, the basic idea of a right is this. As we'll see, there are kind of like two flavors of rights. It's kind of tied to liberty. And one type is what we could call a positive right. And it's I guess I'll do negative first. It's easier. A negative right doesn't mean like a right to do bad stuff. Like I've got the right to license to kill, 007. What it means, a negative right means this. It simply means that you have a right and other people do not have the right to interfere or limit you. At least within the normal operating circumstances. However, it's not an entitlement because it simply says, hey, people can't, they're not supposed to mess with you in regard to this right, but there's no obligation for them to provide you with the means to exercise it. To use a concrete example, the right to free expression is a negative right because what it amounts to is people are not allowed to prevent you from expressing yourself, except of course when they are, like the classic case, yelling fire in theater, that type of stuff. But there's no obligation on the part of others to provide you with the means to do so. So if you want, you could create your own television station, but that's all on you. You have to give the funding and support. No one has to provide you with airtime. But once you have one, supposedly, you'd have the freedom to express yourself. So that's a negative right. It's basically, again, not in the sense of being bad, but in the sense it doesn't give you the means. It just means that people they're not supposed to impose on you. And not surprisingly, people often, cast rights as also as liberties. So you could say the right to free speech, but you could also cast it as the liberty of free speech. Now, what would be a positive right? Well, a positive right is often referred to as an entitlement. Now, legally, we have both negative rights and positive rights. We have things people, are not supposed to legally do to us, but also legally we get stuff. For example, what's an entitlement we get from the government? where we get stuff.
Freedom?
Could be freedom. You know. What like actual stuff, like money? What are government programs are that give us money that we actually have, seem to have a right to? What happens when you retire? Yeah, Social Security is a legal entitlement. That is, like, what if you pay into the system, you know, meet all the rules. It's not only a right in the sense that they don't, you know, can't interfere with you, it's a right in the sense that you get something. You have a right to Social Security, or so it's claimed. Now, there's also, in addition to legal issues, the moral question. So I might say that legally, because it's a matter of law, people do have a legal right to Social Security, because it's the law. But we could raise the question of, do people have a moral right to that? To having, you know, like a guaranteed retirement? And some people would argue yes, some people would argue no. And so a positive right in that regard, also sometimes known as a positive liberty, means that you actually get something. It's, you can typically refer to as an entitlement. And as you might imagine, there's a lot of debate about what sort of things, if any, we're entitled to. Again, a lot of it's politics and legality, but there's also the moral question. To use one final example, we could use the example of like medical care. Some other first world countries, like Canada and the UK, the citizens have a right to health care. In the US, we don't have that. We're largely on our own. So we can have a moral debate about, are states morally obligated to provide health care as an entitlement to citizens? So now we turn to, what are rights for? Well, basically they do two things. In regards to negative rights, they put like limits on what we're allowed to do to other people. Either legally for legal rights or morally for moral rights. So if someone has the right of free expression, that puts like a moral fence, hypothetically, around them to prevent people from silencing them. The second, in regards to positive rights, they lay out what entitlements we are entitled to. And again, these can be regarded as both like legal, what does the law say, which is a legal question, but also moral. What things should we morally be entitled to? Now, to add in some more flavors of rights, in addition to like positive and negative, there's also what's called natural and artificial. So what's the difference? Well, when you say something's natural, what do we mean? Like, for example, if you get a, you just have water, but I guess water's natural. But if they say like, you know, on a bottle, natural flavors, no artificial ingredients, what do they mean?
Nothing mixed, organic.
Yeah, nothing manufactured. Yeah, natural stuff, you can go out and like just find it, you know, and squeeze it out of some, you know, some creature, little ferret squeezings or something. You can juice anything. Someone told me that, if you squeeze it. Someone said to me, if you squeeze anything hard enough, you can get juice out of it. I'm like, I will always remember that now. And I've always remembered it. Yeah, so you can find it out in nature. With artificial stuff, of course, we manufacture. I mean, we obviously use stuff from nature, but we combine them in new ways. So if you've got like lemonade made with lemons, you have natural lemons. Because lemons occur naturally in nature. If it's, you know, if it tastes like lemon because of chemicals we combine, you know, in the lab, we have artificial flavors. So what's the difference between natural rights and artificial rights? Artificial rights, are they manufactured in the lab? And do you have to worry they might give you like cancer or something? Well, fortunately no. Here's the distinction. Natural rights, if there are such things, are supposed to be rights that you get, well, to be circular, naturally, but the idea is you just have them as part of being. They're contrasted with artificial rights. Artificial rights are ones that are granted to you by being in a society. And if that society changed or ceased to be, those rights would, you know, vanish. To provide a couple clear examples. With artificial rights, it's pretty straightforward and easy. One example is the US Constitution, the Bill of Rights. It enumerates a whole bunch of, in the context of law, artificial rights. The legal, rules governing, your rights as a student. Those are artificial rights. You have them because they're in the book. If the United States government collapsed, or was replaced, or the Constitution was, thrown out, then we would lose those artificial rights. If FAMU, changed the rules or ceased to be, those rights would be gone. So artificial rights are rights we get, we create ourselves, typically by being a member of an organization. It could be like a large one like the United States, or even a bigger one like, the United Nations Declaration on Human Rights, but those are artificial in the sense that they're laid out by us, usually by the law, or by the rules of the club. Now they're pretty clearly artificial rights. We just make those up. I've got a bunch of them, you've got a bunch of them, we all got a bunch of them. So those are pretty easy. The natural rights, though, are a bit more difficult, because these are rights you get just by existing. And society could come, society could go, could collapse, the rules could be changed, but your natural rights would always be there, even if the society collapsed. So one rather important question is, are there any natural rights that you just get? They're not part of what's made up in society or cultural organizations, you just got it. Now there's also the question of, once you get into society, what rights do you have? Now, some of these are answered pretty easily. They're often, most countries, organizations, they lay out the rights. You can go and get the document, the handbook, the Constitution, the rules and laws of Florida, and you can flip through them and see what kind of rights you got artificially. Now, what about the natural rights? Well, there is the question about whether they, in a way you've always kind of got them, but they may be given up or suppressed in society. So as we'll see when we look at our good dead friends Tommy Hobbes and John Locke, there are some natural rights that we either give up when we form society, or we kind of like lay them aside. Now, if society falls apart or collapses, then of course these kick back in. Lastly, rights against the government. In relatively modern times, there have been considerable concern about what sort of rights we have against the state. In other words, what are the limits, morally or legally, they have to operate within. Now, if you look at the Constitution, many of the rights we have are rights against the government. Congress shall pass no law, and those are all rights against the government. The government, by the rules of the Constitution, can't do certain things to us. The right to, trial by jury is a right against the government. The right to, claim about no taxation or representation, right against the government. And so we have all kinds of rights against the state. And today, actually, since we've been states, these are important legal and moral issues. Take the issue that's big today of privacy. What rights do we have against the government in regards to our privacy? How much of our business should they be getting into? Okay, so that's kind of the intro to rights. Before moving to the much-dreaded state of nature, anything about rights that needs more rights or less? Yeah, I got that right. I remember watches on left hand, if watches were put on correctly. Then you have to figure out first, which one is right. Okay. So what is the state of nature? Well, the answer is this. Back in what's known as the modern era, basically, roughly break it down, 1400 to about 1899, thinkers such as Thomas Hobbes, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, John Locke, were very interested in the question of rights. What rights do we have? Where do they come from? But also interested in the questions of political authority. What is the basis of the authority of the state? And they came up with this pretty clever mechanism, which is this. If we want to talk about like natural rights or artificial rights, if we want to talk about justifying the state, it'd be useful to imagine, either hypothetically or real, what would it be like if there was no government? It was just people in the natural world with no artificial society, no laws that we made up, no constitutions, no police, no judges, no senators, no mayors, no presidents, just people in a natural state. So the state of nature, to be, I guess, direct about it, is a situation in which there is no governmental authority. There's none of the structures and mechanisms of what we call the political state. Now, how could this come about? Or how could it have come about? Well, one way to approach it would be sort of like a prehistory thing. Before the beginning of time. No, actually it would be impossible. But the idea would be is that at one point when humans first became human, or were first created, depending on what you think about the origin of us, there'd be a time there'd be no government. Day one, people. They haven't got government. And so the question would be is, what would things be like then? Now you could also, of course, do it, kind of more hypothetically. For example, you could either do like before people built civilization. You could also do it sort of like post-civilization. What would happen? What would it be like if civilization, collapsed or vanished? And you could bring in your favorite apocalypse. It could be like a zombie apocalypse. Walking Dead, Day of the Dead, Dawn of the Dead, Night of the Living Dead, Night of the Living Dead 2, Return of the Living Dead, Day of the Land of the Dead, all those dead movies. And once all of that happens, government just kind of collapses. You see people roaming the remains of society, trying to survive. Or if more classic apocalypses are your cup of radiation, you could go with a classic nuclear war, like in the Fallout game series. Boom, nukes go off, society's gone, we're in the wasteland, fighting the mutants. Or you could go Mad Max, which is also kind of the classic, nukes go off, society collapses, you're in the wasteland, driving fast and shooting stuff and blowing stuff up. And so the question would be is, when we're in that state, what are the implications of that? And of course, they're interested in getting out of that state. So that's the state of nature. For whatever reason, there is no government. Either, again, we can do a prehistory thing where people first appear, oh, we're people, and then we got no government. Or it could be like there was government in the before time, and thanks to the nukes and the zombies and the squirrels and the robots, the government is gone, and we're just people, in the wild, trying to survive. So that is the state of nature. So a good question to me is, so why? Well, here's the answer. As I mentioned before, one reason is to consider intellectually, what kind of rights would we have? We have obviously, we wouldn't have any artificial rights because by hypothesis, so there is no society, but would we have any natural rights in that scenario? Secondly, they're very concerned with getting out of that scenario from the state of nature to civilization. And so the question would be is, what justifies the move from no authority to authority? In other words, what is the basis of political authority? And one way to explore that is to say, if we had none, either prehistory, people are like standing around like, hey, what do we do? What would justify having someone say, oh, I'm now, king or queen or whatever? Or if society collapsed and people are in the radioactive wasteland trying to rebuild it, what would justify their political authority, creating or recreating a civilization? So kind of two main questions are, would there be any rights in that state of nature? And secondly, what justifies moving from a state of nature with no authority to a state of now having presidents or kings and police and rules, etc.? Kind of last point for it is the question of, but is it really real for real? Now, some of the people who do the state of nature say, they say it doesn't really matter because maybe there was, ever since there were people, maybe there, day one, someone grabbed, grabbed some vines and tied around their head and say, I am, king of all people, or whatever. So we don't, their view is it doesn't really matter, because it's, theoretical. Even if there never was like a before time with no state, their question is, if there was no state, what would justify it? Or if there was no laws, created by us, what rights would we have? Some thinkers do, though, say it was real. They do say there was a time, in a way it makes sense, people, unless they came like, unless there's like a little manual like how to govern, like waiting for them, they had to like make all this stuff up. So there probably presumably was a time pre-government. Others, people like John Locke, for example, point to, it's a really weird question mark. But anyways, the people like John Locke have said, well, there are cases where it does exist. For example, they point to, well, one favorite example is Robinson Crusoe. Even though it's total fiction, of course, the person's shipwrecked on the island, there's no government there, so people who are shipwrecked would be kind of the state of nature. They're outside of government. He also used the example of relations between nations. Back then, they did not have like a UN, and even now, the UN really doesn't have a long power. They can't really stop us from doing stuff. And he also considers things like natural disasters, etc. So he could say, yeah, it could be real. But again, even if it's not, if someone says, that's not really real, they can still say, well, that's okay. We don't need to have it really real for real, because this is not, a historical account. It's an account of how we justify this stuff. So before moving away from the state of nature, anything about rights or states that needs more stuff? Now, one of the big questions in the ethics of, political authority is this question. The state claims an authority over us, to be able to tell us what we can do, what we can't do, who we can marry, who we can't marry, who we can shoot, who we can't shoot, what kind of guns we can have, what kind of guns we can't have, what kind of things we can smoke, what kind of things we can't smoke, all the things. The state is always in our biz telling us all the things to do or not do. It's really annoying. It's like having parents forever, but not like the good part of parents, like where they get you like nice stuff on Christmas or your holiday of your choice, or where they're always interfering with your freedom. So what is authority? Well, it shouldn't be respected. Now, authority is basically this. It's a good thing to have. Well, why? Well, here's the idea. Crudely put, authority is ability to get other people to do stuff without you having to expend resources. And the expansion of resources would be getting people to do stuff by like having to pay them, one way. Another way would be trying to get people to do stuff by expending the resource of threats or force, or calling in favors. So there are various ways to get people to do stuff that do cost resources. So if you hire someone to do something and they do it because you're paying them, you're using the resource of money. If a person has to call in some favors, get political favors to get things done, they're relying on basically using those favors. But authority is really good because people just do it because you say so. It doesn't cost you money. It doesn't cost you political favors. It doesn't cost you points. They just do it because you say so. So it's a great thing to have because it's free to use. Enjoy. So a very good question then is, what is the basis of authority for the state? And to use a common illustration, one clear example of the authority of the state is policing. If someone's speeding and the police pulls them over, the police doesn't have to pay them to pull over. Quite the opposite, the person pulled over will be paying. And the idea is that people are supposed to obey. And a good question to be is, what gives the officer that authority? Because if I was out driving around, pulling people over and maybe telling them, you're going fast, you have to pay me some money, people at first are like, are you a cop? I'm like, no. Not a cop, just trying to give me money. People would be like, what? They'd probably call the actual police in that case. But the question would be, using that example, what would be the difference between me going on and stopping people who are speeding, taking money from them, and the police? What do they got that I don't get? Now you might say they got a gun. I can get a gun. Guns are cheap and readily available in America. God bless the Second Amendment. So you can say the gun, I say, I got a gun. You say the cop could shoot you. I can shoot you too. They can say, well, I got a badge. I got a badge. Amazon. They sell everything, even badges. Well, they got a uniform. I got a uniform too. Amazon again. Well, they got flashy lights. I got flashy lights. Amazon. Well, they have protect and serve in their car. I do too. But I added a thing about taking your money. That's the extra thing I put on there, because it's truth in advertising. And so, if I got the car, the gun, the badge, the nightstick, cool uniform, sunglasses, what does a cop got that I don't got? Yeah, authority. What, good question is, what's that? Be a stage officer, show me your authority. I mean, they got a nightstick, they can, or shoot you, but that's just gun and a nightstick. You get a badge, but a badge is just a piece of metal. I don't want one of those. Yes, the question to me is, what is the authority? What do they got? I mean, you could go practical and say, well, they got other people with guns backing them up. But gangs have that too. If I got a bunch of my friends, say, hey, let's be cops. Let's get some guns. Let's go around, arresting people. They could say, well, they got some laws. I'd say, great. We'll get together. We'll call it the legislature of, Mike and his friends. And we'll pass a law. We're now cops. And the law is we can arrest people. So, if you want to be kind of cynical about it, the authority is just make-believe. It's like a game. It's like when you play a game and you follow the rules. What's the only thing keeping you within those rules? Okay. You just agree to go along. You say, okay, I'm not just going to flick the hotels off the person's board and just say, I just blew your hotels up, act of God, pow, 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 hotel's gone, mine, I claim it. We're playing risk now. Your Park Place is mine. Yeah, the only thing that keeps you doing that is you agree to play by the rules. So authority, you could say, is just that. We all agree in our game that some people have authority and we pretend like we do what they say. But at any moment, you could just go off the rails. You could, just like in Monopoly, you could just throw the board up in the air and say, screw your rules. Same thing you do to authority. You just say, you're just a guy with a gun, I'm a guy with a gun too. Let's do this right now. And if you kill enough of the people on the other side, you get to be in charge. Because, then people believe in you, you're the ruler. So if you want to be cynical, you'd say authority is just this. We're playing a game, and we agree to play by the rules. But at any moment, you could just say, I'm playing by the rules, not today. And you can do that. You can do that any day. For real. And anybody can do it. Which in a way is kind of scary. Because the only thing that really stands between us and chaos is just, it's just make-believe. We're agreeing to play Monopoly. But if we decide to throw the board in the air, that's it. Now, there are people who, of course, want to say that there's more to it. What are some classic, justifications for authority? Well, the oldest one was probably this. You can always go with force, but then that's not really authority, that's just, people listen to you when you get a gun. One of the oldest ones is claiming that a person is a god, or the child of a god. If you take, for example, the ancient Egyptians, the pharaoh was supposed to be a divine being. They rule literally by divine right. Then even in the Greek and Romans, they would often claim not to be gods themselves directly, but to be children of the gods, to be descended from Zeus, etc. Now, that worked pretty well for a while, until you get to Islam and Christianity. Because if you have a Christian king, can a Christian king claim to be God? No, because that's big blasphemy. Can they even claim to be the son of God? No, because that's Jesus' job, so they can't be that. So they can't claim to be God, the son of God anymore. They've got to go with something else. And the best is to be God. Second best is to be God's kid. And I guess the third best by a long margin is ruling by what's called divine right, that one rules by the will of God. And so one basis of authority has been religious. Either you're God, child of a god, or God wants you to be king or queen. Another basis more democratic one is consent of the people. We all agree, and then imbues whoever's in charge with that power. That's kind of the monopoly version. We say, or we're like with sports. We agree the referees get to blow the whistle and tell us what to do, but it's just on our consent. If we pull away our consent, their authority is gone. We only have to listen to the degree we agree to listen. So it's an important question. What is the basis of authority? Again, the divine rights stuff, the God stuff, basically claims to have an objective authority. You have to obey because they're God. If it's consent of the people, it's basically an agreement. You're saying, I'll go along with this because I said I would. But of course, if you say you would, you can always take that back and say, I don't want to play Monopoly anymore. Now this takes us to the question about legitimate uses of authority, which more broadly construed is the question of what does the government have the right to tell us to do and not do? Which is a pretty broad question. For example, what are some things that would be legitimate for authority to do? That you'd say, okay, the government, yeah, that's good that it does that. What about keeping us from killing each other? Probably good?
Yes.
Probably. What about trying to prevent us from downloading movies through BitTorrent that we haven't paid for? Well, I guess it depends. If they're your movies, you know, and your library depends on it, you're probably like, yeah, get those thieves going. But if you like watching the BitTorrents, the movies for free, the price of your soul, of course, then you may think that that's not legitimate. But this is one of our core areas of debate. What sort of things should the state be telling us to do? And this is, with the presidential election coming up in one short year. God, it's still a year out. I like politics. I'm just like, God, it's like a rerun. It's like watching the same show over and over again. Like, we need some new characters. We need a plot twist. Bring something new in. Maybe, what could we bring in? Somebody thinks maybe zombies or something. Or Yoda. We'll bring Yoda. Yoda 2016. He's got the Force. But anyways. So, one of the debates is over what sort of things the state should be doing in terms of willingness. So, for example, conservatives often want to have less regulation. And Democrats, liberals often want to have more. When it comes to things like healthcare, one of the debates is, one of the issues they keep bringing up is Obamacare. And so one issue is it legitimate for the state to tell you that you have to get health insurance? And now the penalties, I think are increasing. And when you do your taxes, you have to check, yes, I got insurance, or no, I don't, and this is how much, you have to pay it. And some have argued that morally, the government morally should not mandate that we have to buy anything. And then the people who support it say, yes, we have to, that's legitimate. And so many of the debates in politics are moral debates about what is legitimate for the state to tell us to do or not do. In other words, what's the state's business? Now, in order for authority to work, there has to be obedience. Because if you don't obey, the state can kill you. That's just, they have got a lot of guns. And they can hurt you and lock you up, but the state can actually, some of them don't have the technology for it, they can never actually make you obey. You can always say no up until the moment you die. Blood pouring out of your mouth, still saying no. The state can kill you all the way, but it can't make you say yes. Unless it beats you hard enough, maybe it can, because states are horrible. I first learned people are horrible, and nothing has changed my mind. Governments are horrible, nothing has changed my mind about that either. But that's just my opinion. So obedience. Now, this is a moral thing. Morally, do we have an obligation to obey the state? And of course, the question can be seen as generically, assuming, in general, is an obligation. But people often prefer to make it a little more specific, like what type of state and in what regards. Now, we'll look at this issue from the standpoint of Socrates, who gives some arguments as to why we should obey, and from Henry David Thoreau, an American anarchist, who says anarchy, anarchy now, disobey. And so there is the important question of, should we be obeying what the state says? And again, one of the things that, of course, people in authority don't want people to generally know is that it seems that authority is mostly make-believe. They only have the authority we give them from our obedience. When you choose to disobey, they have no authority. I mean, true, they can kill you and send people to kill you, but they can never actually make you obey. It's always within your freedom to not. Unless I get this wrong. Maybe, if they do, maybe President Obama is a God king after all. But probably not. So a good question to be then is, what is the purpose of the state? Why do we get it? Which again ties back into the upcoming election 2016, which is only a short year away. Now, people, of course, disagree about this. Almost everyone who accepts there should be like at least a state, except kind of a minimal thing. The state is basically an instrument of coercion to make people do or not do stuff. And sort of there's two sort of core functions that a state's got to have to be a state. One is, essentially, is what we call a military function, defensive function. A state has to be able to, control its borders and be able to protect its citizens from foreign enemies. So sort of assume job one is what we call the military function of the state. Job two, in terms of its course of power, is maintaining domestic order, law within the boundaries, enforcing its rules. So basically we got two things going. One is keep the state in existence, military function. Function two, maintain order within those boundaries. So we have the military and police functions of the state. And the state's got to do at least those two things, or obviously it wouldn't be a state at all. It would just be a bunch of people running around. Now then the question becomes interesting, what should the state do beyond that, beyond maintaining defense and basic police? And if you've been following the debates at all, this is what a lot of it's about. So, for example, Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton have argued, well, to use one concrete example, let's take college, something we're all familiar with. Now, some people propose that there should be free tuition for college. I mean, someone's going to pay for it, and there's no such thing as there really is no such thing as free tuition, it's just who's paying for it. But the view is, if we accept that, the idea would be the state has a purpose to provide us with education, provide us with opportunity. Another example I gave is the issue of healthcare. Is the purpose of the state to provide us with healthcare as well, to see to the well-being of citizens? And so sort of the way people sort of fit politically is, one, how many things they think the state should do beyond just like police and military functions, and what those things are. And of course, the more things that a person thinks the state should do, the more they favor what we call bigger government. And sort of the, put kind of more simplified, in the United States we kind of have that, push. People who claim to be for small government, and people who want the government to do more. In reality, though, people generally just want more government. They just want it to do more of what they want and less of what they don't want. But it's an important moral question. What should the state be doing? And again, the final couple concrete issues would be healthcare, clearly relevant, education, also things like retirement, welfare, SNAP, which used to be food stamps. Those are all questions about, or connected to the question of what should the state be doing. Okay, before pressing on in our remaining 9 minutes, anything about this stuff that needs more stuff? Now our first dead guy is our old friend Tommy Hobbes. He's a guy, did some stuff. Now all of his background changed, is unchanged. He died, he's still dead, etc. Now, one thing that shaped him, his view of politics, was he was doing his Tommy Hobbing during the English Civil War, where the English were killing the hell out of each other to decide which person is going to be, sent on the throne. The basic idea of, oversimplifying it was, you have the conflict between the divine right of kings, the king ruling as a monarch, versus the view that the parliament should have a stronger role. It's kind of like today we look at it as the battle between the executive and the legislative, only with a lot of killing going on. Now, this bloodshed and destruction horrified and terrified Thomas Hobbes, and rightfully so. No sane and rational person would, like blood and death and destruction. So what did he conclude from his experience of English Civil War? Well, his conclusion was basically this. Without a strong government, or a government at all, there is chaos. Just disaster, destruction, and blood. And that chaos should be avoided by any, basically his view is it's the worst thing. It should be avoided by any means. So what he's trying to do, basically, is find a way to defeat chaos. And so that's his objective, to bring about order. Now his method, as we saw, is, going back to the ancient days of part 2, the same thing. What he wants to do is apply what we call scientific method to this, figure out what people are like, rather than sort of speculating about it sitting in an armchair. He wants to go and look empirically, what are people like? Why do they do what they do? And how would you get from chaos to order? Now, all the stuff we saw about him before still applies. Namely, most likely like an atheist, although he kind of waffles a bit on that. Definitely a materialist, not in the sense that he likes really nice stuff, sure he did, but in the sense that he believes that it's all matter. Also, in terms of his moral view, that's unchanged as well, ethical egoism. So what Hobbes sets up is his version of the state of nature. And it is, as we'll see, a truly, well, as we saw in part 2, a truly awful and brutal state. It's, to use examples from, I'll use a couple examples from fiction that you might be familiar with. I assume that people are still forced to read The Lord of the Flies. I had to read it when I was a kid, centuries ago. I assume they still haven't changed the curriculum since is that true? Still reading Lord of the Flies?
Yeah.
Yep, so unchanged. Probably the same book, probably you might have used the book I read. So he was good. Look for my name. And of course, in The Lord of the Flies, what happens is, the kids, they're in a plane, crashes on the island, they don't have adult supervision, Piggy's killed, the Kong's broken, next thing you know, they're worshiping a pig head on a stick. That's how it goes. And that's kind of Hobbes's, state of nature. It's the awful, war of all against all, with no authority. Another fictional example would be, well, if you've seen the movies, the Hunger Games, not like in a way, kind of the conflict between, I guess, the government and the rebels is kind of state of nature. But in the actual Hunger Games, that is actually a perfect example of what Hobbes, it probably just copied Hobbes. Because what you got is, whatever you can grab is yours, and the goal of the Hunger Games is to do what?
Survive.
Yeah, survive. How do you do that? Yeah, kill everybody else, by any means, necessary. And so, kill them all, if you're the last person standing, you win. And in a way, Hobbes' state of nature that exemplifies it. That it's a brutal, awful competition with there's a couple of rules. Rule 1 is, stay alive. Rule 2 is do whatever it takes to stay alive. So his state of nature is pretty brutal. And his view of people is, people are pretty awful. Or he probably might not say they're awful, they just are what they are. And as we saw, his view is that people are naturally egoists. That means that all we care about is ourselves. I care about me, you care about you, we don't care about anybody else. And we're motivated by two things. One is to seek pleasure, or hedonists, and secondly is to avoid pain. So his view is we are in an awful state of nature, and we're pretty awful. We're just looking out for ourselves. And again, if you want like a nice movie metaphor, the Hunger Games, the actual battle, is a pretty good metaphor, because everybody against everybody, whatever you can grab is yours, and the goal is just to kill everybody and survive. But of course, as you can see from the way that game works out, playing the game means at best everybody's dead but you. So how is Hobbes going to do his Hobbesing? Well, in our remaining 2 minutes, what he does is, again, he says all these other thinkers, he's talking about people like Plato and Aristotle, they seem to have not really thought the matter through scientifically. They didn't do it empirically and look at what people are truly like. So what he plans to do is essentially, literally political science. He's going to look at what people are like and try to figure out, given the nature of us, what can be done to bring about essentially order, to solve the problem of chaos. Now, he thinks that other thinkers have been getting this wrong because they did not, basically use his method. And so he thinks he's finally got it right. And he begins by addressing the question of why do people form society? Because again, his objective is, problem, chaos, state of nature, war of all against all, Hunger Games scenario. So, put it into sort of like a game scenario. Imagine you're dropped in the Hunger Games. And so you're dropped in, the goal is everyone, survive, you get to kill everybody. But then you think, but this is going to suck for all of us because we're all going to die except for one. So how do we solve this problem? How do we get out of the chaos so we can all survive? And that's what Hobbes is basically imagining. We're in the state of nature. Everybody is out to kill everybody, but we all realize that sucks. So how do we make it work so we don't have to do that? And next time we'll take a look at how we try to do this and how it connects to rights. So have a good rest of the Monday, if such a thing is possible. And then next time, more stuff.